we're going to kick off Mary Coll. As you all know, I gave her, I'd started into a big long biography the last time out, and I thought she was going to come out the screen and get me to keep quiet. But I mean, you all know Mary. She's, I suppose, a legend in the Limerick art sector for the last 30 years, really, I suppose, Mary. First of all, very well known as the artistic director of the Belltable Art Centre in the 90s, and then as a poet and a playwright. So it's great to have her here.
That's fine.
Okay, is that enough?
Yeah, that's loads now.
That's enough. So my first question is to you, Mary, is how are you coping at the moment, and how are you managing through this time of COVID?
On a personal level, I think our family, we're coping pretty well. We've been very lucky, touch wood. We haven't been ill. We've followed the directives. We've done what we were asked to do. And, you know, it's been, some days were challenging. I think the weather helped hugely. Since the weather changed today, I think we're actually more in danger of being killed by falling trees than by COVID-19 today. But yeah, it's, I mean, you couldn't imagine something like this. You couldn't have come up with it. And the days have been long. But I appreciate the privileged position that we as a family were in for this time. And therefore, you know, I think I'm not going to complain about it. You know, I just do. I'm very glad. I think the people that were hardest hit are younger people. You know, at this stage of my life, I can adjust pretty well to a quieter period, but I felt very sorry for my young family and my nieces and nephews and people with small children and people with kids doing leaving certs and people. It's just been, that's been really hard.
Yeah, no, it has. I'm in the same position myself. Kids that are, well, they're not kids, they're young adults, and having to just get used to a completely different way of life and not having any touchstone really to compare it with. Yeah. So yeah, it's tough. And in terms of work, are you working completely from home?
Well, in the beginning, yeah. I mean, I have two hats. I work in my husband's firm. He has a law practice, and I work there in an administrative capacity. And everybody's working remotely. So what I do is I go in and do, the building is empty. I just go in and do the tidying up stuff, post that comes in, post that needs to go out, stuff like that. From a creative point of view, then my work, well, I've had loads of time, so I've had really no excuse for doing sweet fuck all, which is pretty much what I've actually managed to do for 8 weeks. I wrote one poem.
Is it harder? Sorry to interrupt. Is it harder to work in this kind of?
Yeah, for me it is. And I spoke to another friend of mine, the writer Helena Close, and we both agreed that we feed off conversation and contact with people. We feed off ideas that come from conversation. We feed off the buzz of interaction with people, you know. And in the beginning, you know, I thought I was going to create lots of things. But I found that I was in the first few weeks, I was very distracted by the constant news cycle. And I was very upset, emotionally upset by what I was seeing and the suffering of so many people, suffering in Spain and in Italy. And I was amazed sometimes when I was talking to people who were able to do online yoga and sourdough bread and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Some days I just didn't feel like doing it. And to me, it doesn't feel real. You know, I know it's really good for people, but I'm a people person who likes just the chat, you know, the social interaction. Yeah. And I find that hard, and therefore I'm not stimulated. And what I'm reading is very light. I just don't want to read anything ponderous or extremely heavy.
Yeah, because I can totally get that, because I had a book, something like that, and I just had to put it away because you feel you need something to entertain you, really, in a sense, rather than something that
you know. I'm watching light stuff on Netflix. We're watching Dead to Me at the moment, which is very light. I finished Anne Enright's novel Actress. I've started Hilary Fanning's new novel, The Weight of Love. And I'm really enjoying those, but, you know, I'm not in a Dostoevsky frame of mind. And I really know one thing. I do not want to go to anything about this pandemic when it's over. I don't want to hear the pandemic opera. I don't want to see the pandemic play. I don't want to hear anything about this when we finally get to the end of it. I am so over it.
And do you think that's going to be a long time before you'll feel confident about going back into the theatre? You're my first polling. I'm testing you out here now in terms of
I'd be practical.
Consumer sentiment.
For first couple of weeks of this, I was literally almost afraid to go outside the door. I was walking the dog, and if I saw somebody 100 yards away, I practically jumped up a tree. Now I've gotten to the point where I accept that this is something we have to live with. And so I will do what I'm instructed to do by the Department of Health. I will wash my hands and carry out normal, good respiratory care, and I will socially distance. But do I want to spend the rest of my life in my house on my own with my family? No. So I would either go to the theatre if the theatre is restructured in a socially distant way, or I will wear my raincoat and stand in a square and watch theatre happen outdoors, or I will, I'll take whatever reasonable precautions are offered. I don't want to spend, it's only May, and if I thought we have nothing to look forward to until sometime in 21 by way of performance, I just, it would be heartbreaking.
Well, the good news is that initially we were very concerned and very worried that would be the case, but the good news is that there's all kinds of collaborations going on between venues both here in Ireland and with venues in the UK, and everyone of course is trying to come up with solutions in terms of social distancing, and so I'm getting more energized and more optimistic that in fact
see those hats. Those hats that have been advertised, I know they look bonkers. They're like a beekeeper's hat, where the hat is like one of those fishing hats that guys and women who go fishing wear, one of those little caps. And then the front is a plastic screen that goes around your face. Now, I know you would feel like an absolute lunatic, but I would have thought you'd have felt like an absolute lunatic 6 months ago walking around with a mask, and masks are perfectly acceptable now. And I think if you can wear something that protects you, but I also think it's going to be very important, Louise, that people exercise a little bit of cop on in terms of their respiratory health. I have been in a choir for years, and you'd be going into choir and you'd get onto the line for rehearsal, and someone would say, I'd say, how are you doing? And they'd say, I'm choking. I'm absolutely smothered with the flu. And you're wondering, well, why are you here? Why have you come out? So I think people will have to be a little bit more responsible in, maybe stay at home for the week that you have the head cold, the cough, the flu, whatever.
But judging by the reaction, I just reading on Twitter at the very outset, back in March, there were a number of tweets and people posting on Facebook about they had coughed on the bus, or they had coughed just innocently, and then the literally the entire heads turning towards them, looking at them in horror. And so people will realize, if I do have a cough, I'm not going. I really can't go into a place where there's a lot of people. I'm just going to have to stay at home and get someone else to do whatever it is I was going to do.
That martyrdom the Irish go on with, where I came into work even though I was dying with the flu. That has to go. Stop. You have to just, if you've got a cold, a head cold, a cough, or the flu, stay at home. Stay at home for a week.
Well, listen, I don't want to talk about COVID all the time, because I'd love to hear you speak about. Just even to go back, you were artistic director of the Belltable, which of course is now under our management. And I suppose what I'd love to know is just your take on the Belltable has. And it has a really special place in the hearts of Limerick people. And I think more so than other venues in other towns and cities around the country, because I have worked elsewhere. But when I've come back to Limerick again after my time here in the early 90s, I was really struck at how still people just, it's nearly like, well, I don't know if it's like a religious thing with them, but the Belltable has a very special place in people's heart. What do you think, or why is that?
I think it's because the Belltable belonged to the people before it belonged to the Arts Council and the City Council. I think it's because organisations that were on the ground here locally, like Féile Limní and the College Players and the Sicilians, and lots of amateur drama groups and young people were involved with the Belltable before it became the Belltable, when it was Arklin na Féile. And when it transferred itself into an art centre venue, I don't think it had I think because it was open all day, the building was open all day, you could go in, have a cup of coffee, wander around the building. Lots of people were used to being in the building, being backstage in the building in terms of performance themselves. So it's, you know, the way they're always talking in the Arts Council about accessibility. Well, the Belltable had that accessibility for people. It was right on the main street, and people walked in the door, and they had a sense of ownership, but I think they also had a sense of pride, and they were never shy in telling me what they thought of either what was on the walls in the art gallery or what was on stage. If they didn't like it, they told me. If they liked it, they told me, and they told their friends. I felt I was working in a public service role, that, you know, I was working on behalf of the people of the city, and that this was very much their art centre.
Okay, and how you were there about 10 years?
I was there 10 years. I mean, before I went into the Belltable, I was working as, it had a grandiose title, I was an executive with Limerick Treaty 300, that project that Limerick had for 1990. Do you remember Jerry Stenbridge used to have a great slag about Limerick Treaty 300? And that was the project I worked on.
One of those commemorative.
Galway had a bicentennial, I think, and Dublin had a quincentennial or a millennium.
A millennium, you're
Cork
right.
Cork had a quincentennial, and like all these things happen when you have local authorities involved, then the councillors in Limerick had a meeting and decided if Cork had it and Dublin had it and Galway had it, Limerick had to have it too. So Shannon Development and the City Council came together and seconded a man called Jerry Lowe, great guy that I worked for, into the city to set up Limerick Treaty 300. And I actually asked him for a job and got it, and had a great time for nearly 3 years. We were about 2 years leading into it and the year itself. And then as the year came to an end, I realised I needed another job, and the vacancy came up in the Belltable. Mairead Byrne.
Yeah, she was your predecessor.
She was my predecessor, I think. I forget sometimes.
Yeah, it was and you first, then Mairead, and then
me. I applied for the job, and I really hadn't a clue what I was applying for. I mean, you know, I had an interview, and I remember Colm O'Brien, who was on the Arts Council, he was on the interview panel. Brendan Lane, I think, was on the interview panel.
Former chair of the Belltable and the Limerick Theatre.
I think Louise Donlon was on the panel, and I'm not sure if Cian O'Carroll was on the panel. Obviously, being Ireland, it was 4 men on the panel. And
tell me, it was about what time was this?
This was 1990. 1991, because Treaty 300 was 1991, so it was coming to the end of that year.
Okay.
And I remember Colm O'Brien asking me some technical questions about a get-in. And I remember looking kind of off into the distance and trying to look as if I was thinking about it very carefully. I actually hadn't a clue what a get-in was. But I got the job. And I think, you know, it was a bit of a shock to me. And thank God Una O'Shea was already in situ. Una had been there with Brie Dukes, and she was there with Mairead, and then she was there with me. And I was blessed very quickly with the team of people I had working with me. I had Lachlan Deegan, and I had Siobhan Colgan. I had, before Siobhan, I had Trish Long. They were all really smart, really bright, really enthusiastic.
Yeah.
And I will not put any fine tooth in it. We had an absolute blast. For 10 years, we had just a really good time, and I'm very proud of the work that we all did.
And it was a huge step for you to take then, to leave the job and to decide.
Oh yeah, it was
or
madness.
Did you decide, look, I want to be...
No, it was the stupidest thing I ever did. I got absolutely carried away with the millennium. And I thought we were entering into this new era, and I needed to do something new. Now, to be fair, Lachlan had decided that he was going on to Dublin. And he had taken up, did he go straight to the theatre festival, or did he go to the Lear first? I'm not sure. I
No,
think you may
Theatre
have gone.
Festival.
You went to the Theatre Festival and then on to Lear. And Siobhan had decided that Limerick, she was moving on to Dublin, and Una had decided that she wanted to retire. And I really did feel that without the three of them, I didn't want to kind of continue. But I also think, to be fair to Belltable, I think that every few years it does need a new director to bring new energy and new life into things. I had done most of the things that I had set out to do, and I think it was better from an energy point of view that somebody new went in. But I made the mistake of having a big going away party with Una, and I announced to everyone that I was going off to write my great novel. I was going to write a great novel. And that didn't happen.
At Una's retirement?
Oh yeah. Oh, I was fully convinced I had this brilliant plan for my future. Didn't quite go the way I had intended. But it was, it was.
But you did come back to the Belltable with a major play and reopened the new renovated Belltable. That must have been was it a very strange experience because of you having been artistic director?
I think sometimes, you think, you make a plan for yourself and things don't go according to the plan at all. They go completely differently. I hadn't set out to be a writer for the stage. I hadn't wanted necessarily to be a playwright. And in fact, I was a little terrified at the idea because, as you know yourself, there's an awful lot of work in it and it can go terribly wrong and you're very exposed. And also, if you write a novel, it's in a bookshop and you may not actually meet the people who are reading it. But if you write a play and you go to it, you can actually feel whether a play is working or not. And it was Joanne Byrne who suggested to me first that I would write something for the Belltable when they moved away, when the reconstruction work was going on O'Connell Street. And they were down in what's now the Gaff in Cecil Street. And Joanne asked me, would I write something, a one-act play for that? And I thought about it and I had ideas and I started to work.
Sorry to interrupt you there, Mary. Had you not, when you left Belltable and said, I'm going off to write the great novel, you were only thinking novels, you weren't thinking play?
Oh yeah, I never thought about writing a play. Honestly,
Despite all your experience of theatre and...
Perhaps because of all my experience in theatre. It's a play, you can... I mean, you know how hard it is. You write a play and then you have to try and get that play produced. And the cost of producing a play is enormous. And it's such a major thing. And you can spend 2 years of your life working on a play and it may never see the light of day. Now you can also spend 2 years of your life on a novel that will never see the light of day. And I do know that because somewhere on the shelves behind me there, I have numerous drafts of dreadful novels that I have attempted to write. Some of them I take out every now and then and read. And I just think, dear God, what were you thinking? But Joanne literally came to me with the suggestion and she needed it, she wanted it, and she wanted it in a time frame. And I'm very good at working to a time frame. And I did. And I was very lucky in that she partnered me with Joan Sheehy as dramaturg and director. And I would produce drafts and Joan would cut them to ribbons and send me off with my tail between my legs or box me around the head with the script. And because of Joan, I got excess baggage on stage in the Gaff and it worked really well. And I was really lucky with Jean Rooney and Monica Spencer in the cast. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed hearing what I'd written come back to me. It was a very different experience. And then Joanne asked me, would I write a stage production for the opening of the Belltable? And I found that terrifying, but luckily I went back to Joan.
How much, sorry to interrupt again, how much time did you have? She obviously had a deadline. I
had a few months.
Was it all?
Yeah, but I mean, look, you can faff around forever with stuff if you want to. You can spend your whole life writing your great magnum opus. It's not necessarily going to be better. But if somebody tells you, look, for me, writing has always been, I've always taken a practical approach to it. I have signed contracts to deliver work that has not been written and then written the work to delivery. I work sometimes with a musical composer, Fiona Linan, and Fiona will ring me up and she'll say something like, I have a commission for a choral work that's being performed on the 2nd of next month, and could you just do the lyrics for that? And I go, yeah, that's grand, because I can work like that. But if you say to me, would you like to write a choral work I'll say, yeah, that'll be lovely. And then I will completely forget about it until 3 days beforehand when you ring me to know. And then I'll do it. So Anything But Love, it was better for me that I had a short lead in. And Joan was incredible to work with. I mean, like, you know, she's not known as the scissors sister for nothing. You know, she will cut your script to ribbons, and if you leave the room while she's working with you, you'll come back and a character will be gone. I had a lovely character that I was very fond of in Anything But Love called Dr. Curran. And I remember leaving to get coffee, and when I came back, there was no Dr. Curran. And I was sitting there thinking, hang on a second, I'm just listening to them reading the script. Where's Dr. Curran gone? And I leaned over to Joan and I said something like, Joan, what about Dr. Curran? Oh, that's not necessary at all. It's complete. It's no purpose. Gone. So anyway, it was a learning. That was terrifying. I'd say if I had taken off all my clothes and stood naked in Brown Thomas' front window on O'Connell Street, I would not have been as terrified or exposed as
on
it was. Opening night, and that was some opening night, if you can remember.
I do, but no, but
yeah.
Let's get to that now in a minute. But just to go back to that whole thing about being nervous, I do remember the first time a writer said that to me, because like all of us at some stage or another have reason that when we need to stand up and speak in public, and you know what everyone says is the most terrifying thing you have to do, or you'd be very nervous, or even maybe, you know, through my choir singing days, having a big show or a big performance ready, and you'd be quite nervous about it. But I never thought that when people feel nervous about standing up and speaking in public, for instance, that a writer or a playwright would have, it just didn't occur to me. And then when I had the conversation with the person, I was kind of stunned that they would feel terribly, even more nervous, in fact, than anything they had ever experienced before, because I suppose your work is
so personal. I mean, you know, you have spent hours, days, weeks alone working on something. And if you're taking it seriously, which hopefully you are, you're giving it your very best shot, and you've created it and you've polished it and you've tweaked it, and then you kind of go, there you are, go out there into the world. And if you've written a line that you think is funny and you're sitting there and nobody laughs, or if you have written a moment that you think will have an emotional impact, and you know, I've been long enough in a theatre to know you can smell it, you can feel it off the audience. Within a few minutes, you're just sitting there going, oh dear God, this is sinking like the Titanic, and there isn't even a soundtrack, you know. And
but Mary, is there not a time, like, you know, when you're at a theatre show and you've gone to a number of them, every audience is different.
Well, they are.
And some audiences are very quiet, they're loving it, but they're very quiet. And
but
other audiences are
that.
responding. Oh, you can
feel that. You can feel it's not the quiet. It's almost, it's like as if you're taking, well, for me, as that night, it's like you're taking the pulse. You can feel every breath, every heartbeat. If somebody only turns to look, like, I'm terrible. I can turn to somebody beside me in the theatre, and without opening my mouth, I have written a 35,000 word critique of that play, and they know what I'm feeling. And I was sitting there that night, and I knew, Jesus, I practically, you know, I knew the entire audience, you know. And I don't think I'd ever go to an opening night of my own work again.
It was that bad.
It was that good, but it was also that bad, because you know, it was wonderful, it was amazing, it was a total, it was hugely exciting and terrifying, but also it was just, dear God, it was a head wreck.
Well, is that because of what happened on the night?
No, I mean, what happened, you know, it's legendary, the chainsaw massacre down the back lane. But I mean, I knew Mick Daly for a long time, and you know, I didn't have issues with Mick. I just wish it hadn't happened. I really do wish it hadn't happened.
But here's where I find it's interesting as well. I was at the opening night. I was director of the Dunamis Arts Centre at the time in Laois. And so obviously I was invited along with a lot of colleagues, and obviously having known Limerick so well, I was delighted to be there. But because I was completely unaware of what was going on, I thought the noise was to do
a lawnmower.
a defective
Air
air
conditioning.
conditioning unit, and it was, I was kind of looking up and said, oh, for God's sake, you know, but it didn't at all take from my enjoyment of the play. I was conscious it was happening, and then I subsequently discovered that there were frantic meetings at the interval, that everybody was rushing around trying to sort it out.
That's
but
one
I
way
was
of describing it.
completely oblivious.
Having my husband wade down the back lane looking like he was going to kill somebody. And I remember another Limerick man, Pat Punch, who's the most mild-mannered person on earth, telling someone to hold his coat because he was going down with John. I don't know what was going to happen. Well, I do know a lot about what happened down that lane that night, but I'm going to keep that to myself. But let's just say we had a quiet week after the opening night. And that was an unfortunate time, you know.
Yeah, it was.
It was unfortunate. But yeah, opening nights, yeah.
I know it's hard to separate what that particular night, but do you think if that hadn't happened, it would have been an easier?
Oh yeah, it would have been easier, but it would have still been fraught with emotion and tension. Yeah. But I was also very much aware that, like, I knew the cast on stage as well, and they were playing a blinder. They were literally continuing with the production, despite the fact that they thought the back wall was going to come in on top of them. So I was worried about them. I was worried about reviewers. I was worried. I think I lost, years passed before my eyes. And luckily, with the new configuration of the Belltable, I was in the very inside of the row beside the railing, so I couldn't get out, because I think if I'd been able to get out, I would have probably climbed over people. And I don't know.
And tell me, that obviously publishing a book of poetry is a slightly more calm, you would imagine, process to go through. Was there that same nervousness when you're watching somebody picking it up in O'Mahony's and opening it and reading it, and you kind of think, oh God, what do they make of this? Is there that same nervousness when you publish a book? It's
funny, because probably, poetry is very different to the theatre, because everybody's literally, theatre is such a production, and poetry seems like such a quiet, introspective art form, and it's not really. I think the hardest thing about poetry is that everybody assumes that every time you use the word I or me, you are always talking about yourself. And sometimes I appropriate the I or me to situations in other people's lives that I'm familiar with. So the I or the me is not necessarily always me. And so therefore, I have had occasions when people have come up to me and they've gone, I read your poem. And I'm going, oh, thank you very much. And, and then they tell me something and I'm going, no, that's not me. A funny one, actually, the funniest one I can tell you is that I heard from, after the first poetry collection I published with Salmon, called All Things Considered, an ex-boyfriend of mine got in touch with me and he said, I can't believe that you're still thinking about me. That poem that you wrote about me, Jesus, it brought me back to the time we were together. And I said to him, I really don't mean to be rude, and I'm not being difficult, but I had no idea. This was no more about you than it was about the man in the moon. In fact, I would much rather have written about the man in the moon than I would have written about you. And let me just assure you, I am most completely over you for a long number of years. And the thought that, the thought of you never entered my head. So, yeah. So it's personal, but it's also, I find it, I think it's a great honor. Sometimes people have come to me and said, a friend of mine rang me recently and asked me would it be okay if she read one of the poems in my new collection in silver at her father's funeral. Oh, no. And I was incredibly honored by that, that something I had written was able to speak to somebody in a very personal way at a time in their life, which was extraordinarily stressful and emotional. Don't think anybody would be reading sections of anything but love or excess baggage at a funeral. But
you never know.
You never know. You never know.
So, okay, thanks for that, Mary. I'm going to open it out and see has anybody any particular questions. Now, everybody is putting in questions on the chat, but actually, I'm going to ask Sean, who is co-hosting with me here. I saw a question come in there from Sharon. Sean, can you unmute Sharon and just ask if she can ask her question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, Sharon, loud and clear.
Hi. Hello, Mary. How are you doing?
Yeah. Good to hear you.
And you. I just wanted to ask you, in recent years, in terms of theatre, what would be a big highlight for you from Belltable? Something you've seen in Belltable?
No, there's been so many, and I have to be so politically correct because I'm trying to think of all the productions that I've seen in the last number of years. I mean, if I was to cheat and say that the production that has stayed with me the most for a long time is the Druid Shakespeare, and I know it wasn't in Belltable, it was in Limetree. But for me, that absolute immersion in those Shakespeare history plays, I was lucky enough to be able to go and see it in an entire day. And that was extraordinary. And Pat Kinnivan in the Belltable, his work is just, I think it's exquisite. It's absolutely exquisite. And now my brain is going into freefall because I haven't had to have a proper thought that was coherent for about 8 weeks, other than what are we going to have for our dinner and is it too early to have a drink. But definitely for me, that Druid production is one of the standouts of the last number of years.
Yeah, I must say, for a lot of people remember that really clearly, and I found that actually my 3 girls were teenagers at the time, and we were going on holidays, I think, down to Kerry, just on the day of one of the 3, because it was split up during the week, and then on the Saturday we had the 3 or the 4, was it 4 plays? No, it was 3. It was the 3 plays. And so I said, right, we're going to go to the 3 plays, and then we're getting to the car and driving on down to Kerry. And, you know, they kind of were looking at me with slightly, are you mad? But they went along with it. And I was stunned, actually, at their they just loved it, completely captivated by it all. And it reminded me, I suppose, as well, the whole idea that Shakespeare, when it's done for schools, is really quite stodgy, and you know, you can't really make anything of it. Whereas Druid Shakespeare, it was marvelous. It was, and so much so that about 2 years later, Ellen asked me, she was doing whatever Leaving Cert play it was, probably, I think it was Macbeth. And I suppose in all innocence, she was saying to me, I wonder would Druid Shakespeare be doing Macbeth next, because I'd really love to see it the way they did, you know. And when you hear something like that,
don't you think, though, Louise, that it's kind of counterintuitive that so much of the theatre for young audiences is such a load of tripe that by the time they get to make their own choices about going to things, that their experiences with theatre have been very negative because they've been dragged to things that aren't always that good. Now, yeah, I know you can't say that, but because I no longer work in the arts and I'm no longer dependent on funding from any organisation, I can say that, you know, it's not good enough just to trot things out because they're on the curriculum. Yes. I think that does more damage to potential audience development.
But I think it's not just curriculum Shakespeare. A lot of Shakespeare is very hard. It's really hard work for a lot of people, and a lot of people are turned off by it. They go once and say, "Oh, I'm not going back there again."
Yeah, well, I mean, nobody would imagine that you would spend 5 or 6 hours in a theatre watching Shakespeare's history plays. But then again, I think, and it comes back to something I've always felt, if the work is of a sufficiently high standard and quality, and the preparation put into producing it is of a standard of excellence, you'll get an audience to engage themselves with it, even if it's something as dense as the Shakespeare history plays. But, you know, I think we have to get to a point, we have to be optimistic in relation to the future of theatre. And I do hear what I'm hearing from talking to people. Okay, maybe I'm talking in a glass bubble, that everyone I talk to works in the arts or has some involvement, but we've got to get back to a stage where we get performance happening again, where we get people able to engage creatively with the arts. you know, where even if we open galleries and you can walk through socially distanced, if you can screen film clubs on the gable wall and stand on the street and watch it, but if we have to think about a future for months and months and months and months that's going to be devoid of the things that enrich our lives that much, it's going to be a bloody awful. And I think we'll be living with this virus for a long time, and therefore I think we have to think outside the box and be prepared to do things differently as audience members. And we also have to support our artists and our writers and our performers and that, because they are really suffering. You know, the response of the government to the arts, Josepha Madigan's response has been abysmal. And the response to these are people, they've no income. You know, they literally have no income, and a lot of them are self-employed and won't qualify for support from the Department of Social Protection, and it's all complicated, you know. And then you have, it drives me nuts, then you have something, you know, like Ace Donna, and people are on a canoes and they can get, I don't know, 17 or 19, 20,000 a year. And Ace Donna is by invitation only from Ace Donna members. That's got to be the oddest system of awarding merit in the creative industry ever. So yeah, I think, you know. Listen,
I've just spotted, well, I do want to send you a message, let you read out a message here from Pat Buckley, who joined us from
my
South
friend
Australia.
Pat in South Australia, she's in Adelaide.
Okay, yeah.
Can I ask Mary if the corporate market is a target for the future, given the challenges?
That's from Carl Daly.
Corporate market. I'm always reluctant to compartmentalize things into markets. You know, I think if you can make really excellent work, then that market is everybody, including the corporate market. I've never seen the corporate sector respond to the arts as much as we'd like them to respond. You know, there've been for years, for the 10 years I was in the Belltable, trying to get money out of the corporate sector was like trying to get blood out of a stone. It always seemed to me in Limerick that there was a much easier job getting money for sports than there was for the arts. And I don't know how you would go after it. The corporate sector seems to be the kind of thing where they buy into something and then they want to entertain clients and things like that. And I'm not sure how you get that fit right. But then if you're doing commercial work, as we'd call it, Louise, you know, if you're going to do something that you think has a very wide audience appeal, I mean, you know, from programming.
We I suppose the Lime Tree is quite different from the Belltable in the sense that it has a much greater capacity, which means we can get much bigger shows of a bigger scale, and therefore they're quite attractive to the whole corporate market. And we have really, we would have done pretty well in approaching like whole organizations that would literally take a full show, especially in a week-long run of performances. And what we've noticed as well in the last couple of years, this whole business of networking. I mean, everyone says you know, in any business, you've got a network. And I always hated it with a passion.
Oh, it's never any good.
I felt I was never any good at it. But as somebody said to me when I started into the whole business, nobody is good at networking. Everyone hates the idea of it when you start. But actually, you have to when you work at it and when you kind of do it properly, it really can work to your benefit. And what I do know, and what people have said to us, is that what you might call the corporate world, they're really interested and they really are curious about the sector that we're in. And if you meet the right people, they can really...
It's trying to find that fit, though. It's trying to find the person in the corporate sector that actually has the fit. I see there's a question from Tara Doolan there about standout moments. Well, I mean, I look back at Pigtown, Mike Finn's Pigtown. That was extraordinary. And the standout moments, Rough Magic. There were so many shows Rough Magic did. Something I was personally really proud of that was something we set up was the Unfringed Festival. And we had shows with the Corn Exchange, the car show out in the street where people sat in the back seats of the cars. Twin Druid came with the Beauty Queen of Linan. When the Abbey Theatre came with Portia Coughlin, and when I mean, okay, a big standout moment would be the Abbey Theatre's first tour with Dancing at Lunasa, where we had a box office with poor Jackie at the box office with those little tiny paper tickets that you tore out of the book like a raffle tickets. And I was pregnant with my daughter Ellen at the time, and we arrived into the street to go into work, and there was a queue. There was a queue out the gate of the Belltable, down to the corner and back around into the corner of Heartstone Street, because people wanted tickets. And they literally, and Jackie couldn't answer the phone because there was such a demand, and she was trying to deal with people in front of her. We sold out 6 nights and a matinee in about an hour, and we would have sold it in 3 minutes if it had been online. And then I spent the rest of the week dealing with people who hated me forever because they couldn't get tickets to see Dancing at Lunasa.
Oh my goodness, great stuff. Yes, what a show to be on tour. Mary, I'm afraid we're going to have to wind up because it's just about 3 minutes to 2 o'clock, and I've seen we've lost a couple of people because they've also got no more Zoom meetings at 2. So listen, really thank you so much for doing this. Thanks everybody for joining in, and we'll be back very shortly. Actually, not next week, but the Friday week, we'll be back with a new guest. So, listen, Mary, thank you so much for doing that.
My pleasure, and thank you, everyone. Stay safe, wash your hands.
Indeed. Bye.